Now, one other thing I wanted to ask was, what about the people who are pro-South and friendly to Southern culture that are living in regions outside of Dixie? Certainly they're outraged as well. What role could they play in the Southern nationalist movement today, given the fact that it's unlikely that their states will secede and join a free South?
Well, I think a good role that people who are either transplanted Southerners who are living for reasons beyond their control outside of the South, or whether they're people who have no connection to the South but just simply sympathize with the South and our principles, they could really help us by pushing these state sovereignty resolutions and amendments, other sorts of related legislation in their states. Because look, if 50 states have state sovereignty movements that get serious, that is going to help the South. It's going to help everybody who's trying to get out from under the boot heel of Washington, D.C. The more states that do this, the less attention that Washington, D.C. and the empire can pay to each individual state. So if you have a state sovereignty, devolution, secession, whatever you want to call it, movement that's spreading to all 50 states, the federal government's resources are spread so thin that they're not going to be able to rein anyone in. So push for these principles in the state in which you live, whether it's a southern state or not, because these principles are the principles of freedom and liberty, prosperity, and they're the things that have made the North American continent the freest and most prosperous in the history of the world over the last 200 years. And they can be employed again for that. And by doing it, you not only help the South, but you help yourself.
Now, linked to that, what would you say about county secession? If one state was unable to secede, do you think county secession is a viable option? Certainly perhaps not a first choice, but what would you have to say about that?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I have thought about that before. The Founding Fathers gave us sovereign political units, the states. Now, the states, the relation of the state, of one state to another state, as in our federated constitutional republic of these United States, all those states are on an equal footing with one another. Their relationship to the general government in Washington that they created is not the same as the relationship between that state and a county thereof. So I would say, as a traditionalist, I would say that it would probably be unwise for a county, as a matter of course, to think about seceding from a state and becoming an independent political entity of its own. I could see a county on the border of one state secede and become part of another state. I could see that before I could see a county in any state secede from that state and become a little independent duchy or whatever on its own. But there is a caveat here, and that is if a state itself becomes so tyrannical in its governance and the county has absolutely no other recourse to escape tyranny, then I could see breaking the American tradition and supporting a county secession to simply protect the life, liberty, and property of its citizens from a tyrannical state government.
Now, my final question for you, Dr. Hill, is going back to that question I asked you earlier about sovereignty being pushed. So now that state sovereignty and secession even have entered the public discourse and are being covered by the so-called mainstream media at a level not seen in generations, what can Southern patriots do to prevent the message of Southern nationalism from being hijacked or simply being paid lip service by politicians and pundits?
Well, that's a very important question, and something that I and the League Board have considered for some time. I think a lot of times you have these words or phrases that gain popular credence and sort of become hot topic buzzwords that people recognize and rally to. State sovereignty, which is the big term today that people are using and gravitating to, is no different from states' rights, the term our ancestors were using back in the middle of the last century, middle of the 20th century. Nor is it very far removed from the idea of secession, which is the ultimate outplaying of state sovereignty or states' rights. So today, this language is being couched somewhat a new way, but it's an old message. State sovereignty, states' rights, secession, all of the things that lead to the people regaining control of their own political, economic, social lives, as opposed to having those things dictated to them. It's an old battle that's been dressed up in some new language. The League of the South has been pushing for state sovereignty, states' rights, secession, whatever you want to call it, from day one.
Right.
And not just for the South. We've said if it's good for the South, this is good for everybody. I don't care whether you're from Washington, Oregon, California, Massachusetts. It's good for everybody.
Self-determination can be understood by everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Self-determination, which is a fundamental principle based on the consent of the governed, which is one of the hallmarks of our system. But, the thing about it being hijacked, Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, obviously has a big platform to speak from.
Right.
He mentioned secession one time all over the country because he's a governor, and that's the way it should be. Obviously, Rick Perry, governor of Texas, was not serious about secession. He's an insider of the first magnitude. He was simply, I think, testing the waters to see what kind of response there would be to this, and to his surprise, I think he got more than he bargained for.
It was quite a response.
It was quite a response. And, you have these tea parties all over the country. A lot of them are sponsored by the Republican Party, which goodness knows they're not for secession. They were the ones who opposed it 140-something years ago, and I don't think they've changed their spots. But what concerns me is that there will be some charlatan come along who tries to ride the crest of this wave and takes this thing down the complete wrong path, and we end up worse off than we are right now, because things can get worse.
Right. With the tea parties and the town hall protests, when you have neocons from Fox News, such as Sean Hannity there, it seems pretty clear, correct me if you disagree, they're trying to attempt co-opt this sentiment.
Sure, for Sean Hannity to be anything that really threatens the government's supremacy is a farce. Because Sean Hannity, even though he's, he and Rush Limbaugh, Mr. Conservative personified, those guys are establishment guys. They just happen to like one side of the establishment coin better than the other, the Republicans over the Democrats. They're all part of the problem. They're all part of the establishment. But what I fear is not only co-option of this movement by the establishment to take it down a dead-end road where it goes nowhere, but I fear it'll be co-opted by some charismatic type leader who is, outside the establishment, but is doing this for some personal reasons of ego and glory, and run this thing into being discredited. Now, the league's been around for 15 years. We've got a track record. We've tried to do things right. We've tried to educate people on what needs to be done, and we've tried to tell people that this was something that was going to have to be done right, going to have to be done deliberately, that it was going to have to require a lot of thought and a lot of work. And we said that the time would come when it would be time to move and make these things a reality. But still, you have to make sure that you are taking the right steps in the right direction at the right time to make sure that this thing really works the way it should work, this movement toward state sovereignty or state rights, secession, whatever you want to call it. If it gets co-opted by somebody who is based on the cult of personality, and you've got this flamboyant, charismatic leader who on the white horse who's outside the establishment, this movement could be discredited in a very short time. And that's the two kinds of co-option I fear right there, one inside and one outside.
I see what you're saying. It's something that I personally had not really thought of, that angle that you're talking about, and I know our listeners will appreciate hearing your thoughts on this. And I think I ought to let you get back to doing what you do best. I do want to thank you for sitting down with us.
Well, J.M., I appreciate the opportunity to do this, and anytime you want to interview me, because I always enjoy going to the websites that post all this good Southern stuff, and I'm always very deeply honored to be a part of this. So thank you for the opportunity to be interviewed.